Aloha and welcome into the Kaimaina Intervention podcast. We are back together again for another journey, and we're so excited to have a panel with us this evening. And we've got a couple of expert panelists that we'll be introducing in just a minute. But as we get started, as everyone knows, what we like to do is kind of use the analogy of the canoe and of a voyage, and how our ancestors used to go on a voyage. And in the canoe, everybody has their role. And likewise on this podcast, we each have our role. And my name is Tauasu Harrington. Tau, you can call me Tau. And I'm basically the steersman. I'm the host of the show or the podcast, and I'll just kind of be here to kind of keep the conversation moving forward. Our first mate is Soa Mulitalo, and she is going to be kind of our Dr. Taholo's right-hand man or right-hand woman as we go on this journey. And then our captain on this voyage is none other than Dr. Lani Taholo. And so we're excited for this journey because we have a couple of extra crewmates with us. And but before we get into introducing them, to take this analogy just a little bit further, you don't go on a voyage of this sort without first gathering the crew together and talking. Yeah, like most often you might have a chant, you might have a pule, a prayer, but you want to get everybody together and make sure that we all understand where we're going. And so we'd like to do that for our podcast with a reading of the vision statement, sharing of our vision statement for Kaimaina, and then the mission statement, which is very appropriate because what we want to do is understand where we're going tonight and what we want to accomplish, what our destination is. And then as we go forward, everybody knows where we're going. Everybody kind of knows what they can bring to the table, and we're looking forward to a great journey. So let me turn the time over now to Dr. Taholo to give us the Kaimaina Intervention Vision Statement.
Thank you, Tau. Our vision for the Kaimaina Intervention is that our work is to help people receive the Kaimaina Intervention wave of a safe space where therapeutic and culturally based skills for emotional healing are practiced to not lose the me in the we, nor the power of the we, for therein lie the navigational threads of successful emotional healing.
Thank you, Dr. Taholo. I love that. Soa, why don't you give us the mission statement, give us a little bit more background and information as to what our mission is.
Thanks, Tau. So the Kaimaina Intervention mission statement is: the Kaimaina Intervention podcast and group curriculum offer a Kaimaina wave of culturally based skills, support, and a safe space for emotional healing with generous and humble Kaimaina Intervention trained therapists and trained cultural consultants to help others see, hear, and understand themselves, their loved ones, and even their offenders above, below, and around all the noise of the world. This is the essence of navigating through emotional healing successfully while keeping your true self intact.
I love that, Soa. Thank you. It is and that's a worthy mission that we're on to we want to have a conversation about healing tonight. And the Kaimaina Intervention podcast kind of takes different subjects, and we just have a conversation about how we deal with some of the things that we struggle with. Kaimaina Intervention was founded by Dr. Taholo for the purpose of addressing trauma and conflict in the lives of Pacific Islanders in a culture-based format or methodology that we can actually all relate to. And so today's conversation is going to be about something called the Overappeasement continuum. And so that we understand what we're talking about, I'm going to turn some time back over to Dr. Taholo so she can give a quick overview. After that, we'll introduce our guests and we'll jump into the conversation. So take it away, Dr. Taholo.
Thank you, Tao. So the concept of over-appeasement or over-pleasing among our Pacific Islander communities comes from the Kaimaina study research and the Kaimaina intervention manual, where shame and invalidation are driving the appetite among some of our people to please and over appease family and or peers so that our shame will be hidden. It is another way of receiving validation to make up for the invalidation that we may feel or experience. For example, when we don't meet our family or our cultural experiences, expectations, our cultural expectations or our duties. This type of shame can then lead to what we call blind loyalty. This goes down to a deeper level where shame and invalidation dictate your loyalties, not your love. Even if you disagree, and it is given at the expense of you speaking your truth. Next, this can then lead to what is called extreme codependence, which means that this is when we overwhelmingly depend and rely on another person to the point where we begin losing our own sense of self in deep shame and invalidation that seems normal to us now. You no longer look to see what you see, what you hear, and what you feel as evidence to gather your own facts for your decision making. There is no healthy sense of self to initiate or navigate relationships. Finally, this can lead to deep loneliness. This is not just a feeling of being lonely, but an all-encompassing sense that we are deeply alone in our own thoughts, in our own feelings, and everything around us seems numb. The numbness is without sound, without sight, and without feeling. In fact, your whole body feels numb. Deep shame and invalidation have seemed to take over, and hope seems almost non-existent. Sadly, some of these situations can lead to the vicious cycle of more conflict, more trauma, and even violence, abuse, suicide, and grief. These same thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can be passed on from one generation to the next through repeated examples from our family and or our caretakers and those that we are surrounded by. Tonight, we are here to have a dialogue about some of the effects of this concept called overappeasement, and most importantly, to demonstrate that there is hope, that there is always hope for our people, and that you and we are never alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taholo. I love that. Man, that's deep stuff. And this is going to be a serious conversation that we have together today. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity, because this is the kind of stuff that we tend not to address. We tend not to talk about. And this evening, we have the privilege and the blessing of having a couple of special guests with us tonight who can address this topic both from personal experience and also from the context or the position of being a counselor and talking with somebody else that is going through it. Both are parents that have children or have people that they mentor. And so we will be gleaning information from them on how they deal with this overappeasement syndrome that Lani just described, or that Dr. Taholo just described, excuse me. And so let's start by introducing our first guest. I'll turn the time over to Soa Mulitalo, who actually works with our first guest, and let her introduce him. Go ahead, Soa.
Thank you, Tao. I am very honored to introduce our first special guest, Jake Fitisemanu Jr. Like Tao had said, he is my boss, but also one of my greatest mentors and fellow resident of West Valley City. Represent!
Yay, yay.
So, thank you, Jake. Jake was born in New Zealand to Karen Thong from Kaimuki, Oahu, Hawaii, and Papali'i Jacob Fitisemanu Sr. from Falefa, Upolu, Samoa. He is the oldest of 8 children, and he grew up in Hawaii and Utah. In 2011, Jake co-founded the Utah Pacific Islander Health Coalition, which promotes wellness among Utah's 60,000 strong Pacific Islander population. At a national level, Jake has worked to advance underserved communities through his work as a director of the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum, a 2-term appointee to the National Census Bureau Advisory Committee, a White House commissioner during the Obama administration, and advisor to the National Academy of Medicine. Jake lives with his wife and their 2 daughters in West Valley City, Utah, where he was recently reelected to the city council.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake, for being with us. It's such an impressive resume. We're so grateful for all, especially for all that you do in the community. It's now my privilege to introduce our other special guest, Richard A. Kaufusi. And Rich comes to us from Salt Lake City, graduated from South High School, played football at Brigham Young University. Some of you may have heard of the BYU Cougars. Back in the days when it was the golden age of BYU football, late 80s, early 90s. We had Ty Detmer won the Heisman Trophy, really some great years. And I had the privilege of being a teammate of Rich's back in those days. Rich got his undergraduate degree from BYU, and then went on to serve in the community, both in high school as athletic director, as a coach, and set up Tongan curriculum to help teach Tongan at the high school level within the communities. And then he went on to get his graduate degree at the University of Utah, and is been very instrumental in a program there where it's called he's the director of the Opportunity Scholars program at the University of Utah, and they do great work. I can speak from personal experience. I know people that have been through this program and speak very highly of the things that Rich is doing there, and has always been very, very much interested in the community and our culture, and how our community and our culture can have an impact on the rest of the world. To that end, he has been involved in teaching travel and tourism. He makes sure that the students who are involved in these programs get a chance to go out and see other places and learn from other cultures as well. And so we're so privileged to have Rich on with us, especially because he is about to leave on a mission on July 1st. And so his time is limited with us in this world. He'll be serving the Lord full time in a little while. So we're grateful for your time this evening, President. Thank you for joining us. And so Rich Kaufusi is our second guest. So grateful to have Jake and Rich on our panel. We're going to go ahead, and we've established some questions to talk about this topic of overappeasement, and we'll take those questions one at a time. Each of us, myself and Soa and Dr. Taholo, will pose some questions and we'll get answers from you. We can start with you, Jake, on the answer, and then go to Rich, and then we can alternate as we go forward. The next one, Rich, you can take the answer first, and then Jake, you can follow him. So with the first question for this evening's conversation, go ahead, Soa, and tee that up.
Awesome. And so it's just referring back to the concept that Dr. Taholo had introduced earlier. And so how do you view this concept of over-appeasement playing out in our Pacific Islander family homes and in our cultural community? And then how does it also impact your work?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a fascinating topic because although we are addressing it as an issue or something that we should be aware of and concerned about and learn how to handle better in our individual lives and collectively as a community, I also think that over-appeasement is actually based in some really positive traits within our culture, right? In that we don't just measure somebody's success or one's value in terms of their financial success or their social status, but we consider people to be good people in terms of self-sacrifice, in terms of service. And there's nothing wrong with that, but where it becomes an issue is when appeasing others really takes precedence or occurs at the expense of our other personal and family and community obligations, or if we end up being so caught up in appeasing others and in serving others and in doing what could be great things for others, but in that process we end up neglecting those who we're immediately responsible for, is where I see that becoming an issue. So yeah, a fascinating topic that I think is based in some really positive traits and some really great components of our culture, but also something that, if taken to the extreme, can be really destructive individually and in terms of families and communities.
Yeah, I echo that as well, Jake. And by the way, it's good to see you, and thank you so much, everyone, for the opportunity to be here as well. And thank you, Dr. Taholo. Because if you think of us as Polynesians, that is part of our culture of providing care for others, of providing the best thing that we have for others. It is, from all over Polynesia. It doesn't matter where you're from. That's the Polynesian way of how we take care of each other, is providing that kind of care for one another. And I think maybe appeasement, might be I don't know if it's the exact word for that, but it's just the common courtesy that we afford others. And like you said, Jake, I think it carries over a little further in the fact that we're in a dog-eat-dog world, so to speak. And that same kind of behavior and cultural upbringing that we have sometimes doesn't fit in trying to get ahead and trying to go above and beyond. I mean, I just yesterday I was at the airport, and a guy, I'm standing right there, and then he just walks right by me and right in front of me in front of the line, and everything else. I thought sometimes I that happens a lot. And so what I do, oh yeah, go ahead, take my spot there. That's fine. It's no big deal. And I've really had to kind of, bite my tongue somewhat, but at the same time, I just wanted to teach a lesson, but at the same time, it is who we are of just the common courtesy that we have for people around us. So yeah, as you mentioned, yes, it is based on some really good things of who we are as a Polynesian people, but then at the same time, how is that overused, and do we over appease people to the point where we're not doing enough for ourselves? We're not moving forward. And so I guess it's nice to have Dr. Taholo here to kind of guide us on this. But I'm just trying to be practical about what I see out in our communities, in our society, and how we as Polynesians interact in that space, in the public space. So
thank you, Rich. Thank you, Jake. I do want to ask in a little bit further, and just what Soa would probably be guiding us to is, So how does this specifically impact your work? Because each of you are in the community and you see this happening. And the concern that emerged in the Kaimaina study was that it ended up being many times at the expense of their own truth. They'd rather hide it. They'd rather not say anything. They would just appease, within their families, within their communities, which ended up becoming pockets of secrecy for holding in things that if we're not unearthing the pain and the hurt and whatever our families are going through, it's not going to get healed because we're not even talking about it. So how has this impacted your work and what each of you do in the community when you see this type or witness this type of possible over-appeasement, over-pleasing when it comes to our people, possibly some of the pockets of secrecy that's happened, even with some of the suicidal cases that we've had here locally in the Salt Lake Valley. Spoke with some families that were very close to some of the teenagers. If you'll recall, in 2018, we had a rash of suicide cases among our Pacific Islander teens. And so that's what emerged, was there were some pockets of secrecy, but there's that over-appeasement component that emerged as, well, we don't say anything because, we want to just please, the community, the family, and not say anything. Yeah. That shame is there, that invalidation, that fear of shame, that fear of invalidation.
I was talking with a family member yesterday, and these were about, since I'm getting ready to go out on this mission, and specifically about abuse and how that has continued to be something that had bothered these missionaries, and some have come back home to try to fix that, feeling that they can go out and do this work, and yet everything's going to be okay because it is connected to a family member, it's connected to a name, it's connected to our pride and who we are, and a little bit of that cultural part of, okay, I can swallow this, I can appease this whole thing, and just I think I can go out here and do this, whether you're going off on a mission or going off to work or going off into your life and in marriage or whatever it is. Yes, some of that stuff is covered up, meaning it's not talked about because pride of your family pride gets in the way of you wanting to fix things. Or so I think we've been trying to help our youth and young adults, just say, hey, just talk about it. It's okay. We can talk about this. We can provide you the help that you need and the resources. And of course, on my end, from the church perspective, we can apply gospel principles to bring peace and comfort to you as well through this. So.
Great examples.
I think in my sphere of work, a lot of the work and research that I do is found at the intersection of health and medical science and education or health promotion. And I think if there's one thing that I do notice where these kinds of themes do impact me in my work, or that I do notice them in work, is in youth development and kind of, career path trajectories and development in pre-med and other fields like that, pre-health science fields, where sometimes we encounter Pacific Islander students who, for all intents and purposes on paper, are perfect, right? Their grades are amazing, their attendance is fantastic, they're passing the test that they need to be admitted into these different programs in health. And unfortunately, for a variety of different reasons, but sometimes it's the reason we're talking about, they end up foregoing or denying themselves access to opportunities to progress individually, to maybe further their education or to open, their horizon for different kinds of professional fields, because they feel pressured, and that can be internal or external pressure, to prioritize the needs of others, rather than being able to go to trade school or go off to college, etc. And so I've seen that in my own family as well, where, and I'm trying to be very sensitive around the terminology that I'm using here, but I think we can all think of somebody or somebodies in our families who we all thought we're gonna, we'd all be working for one day, or would be doing amazing things and publishing amazing books, but for one reason or another decided that their place was at home, or they needed to stay home. They couldn't go to college. They needed to stay home and take care of grandma. They need, again, these are all fantastic and valid things that we should be prioritizing in our lives. But I do think that sometimes I see where we individually and collectively end up denying ourselves particular opportunities, or maybe end up foregoing or delaying things that are more immediate opportunities, because we feel the need to at least appear selfless and altruistic, and that we're not doing this over here because we're prioritizing family or taking care of kids and other things at home, rather than going forward. So that's a really long, politically correct answer to what I was trying to say, is that because I don't want to be judgmental. There are a lot of different situations we know that are out there, but I think that this appeasement or over appeasement can sometimes affect our priorities, and can sometimes limit our opportunities if that's our main, if that's really what we're doing. It's a little short-sighted in my perspective. But
I've got a question. Lani, Dr. Taholo, what have you seen are ways that shame has been hidden?
So the shame of not looking like they are fulfilling their cultural role in the family. So young people leaving college, this has happened over and over and over again. We've been seeing it. It was exactly what Jake was describing. They're leaving, they're in the middle of their master's program, or they're in the middle of their bachelor's program. And because the situation wasn't prioritized earlier, there's one person that was called upon out of school to leave from campus, leave the school. And of course they want to take care of their parents and their grandparents. That's not the issue. They want to. The issue was, am I by myself? Am I going to do this by myself? Are we going to talk about this? Are we going to have a dialogue? But rather than do that, even though that was the thoughts and the feelings that they expressed, they held it in, to the point where at one point, one of them became suicidal, because they had worked and their butts off to get to this level where they were acing their tests and acing their homework and working with the professors and all of those that need. And they were actually doing it so that they could bring the financial status and the level of their family being able to receive more resources up. But when they were, being told, you really need to come now and do this, they held in the shame. They said, no, I'm gonna look shameful in front of my siblings. I'm gonna look shameful in front of my elders, my parents and my grandparents, to come back. I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna leave school. I'm gonna bite my tongue. And that's where the shame took them. They almost lost their life. So.
Yeah, I love this conversation. If I can just interject here, and I love how both of you, Jake and Rich, both of you kind of gave us a wonderful place to start, which is that this desire to please is a wonderful part of our culture, and it's a very important part of our culture. And I think what we're talking about is when that gets when it goes too far, right? And So like a couple examples that we've all seen or maybe can relate to. Lani or Dr. Taholo just gave a great one of somebody who's in school and decides to leave so that they can take care of the family, when really their desire is to stay in school and to contribute to the family by fulfilling their purpose. Oftentimes, they're, as young men growing up in Polynesian families, we feel like, oh, we should play sports, got to play football. We've all many of us have followed that path. But there's not everybody really wants to do that. There's plenty of guys that they end up doing that because that's what they feel is expected of them. But in doing so, they completely ignore who they really are. And that is can often be like the first step of suppressing your own will and giving it to other people who are outside of you, telling what you should do. And so there is a part of this that is innocent enough, and then it gets to a point where it becomes destructive. And so I think that it's that side of it that becomes destructive that we really want to delve into, because I think the innocent side of it, or the part of it that doesn't harm anybody, that is really the beautiful part of our culture, is where we want to keep this element of our culture. But what we want to address and see if we can talk about, and maybe talk about how you guys see it, how you guys deal with it, even within your own families or within the groups that you work with. How do you help to resolve those things so that people have the courage to speak up?
Yes. And Tao, with that being said, I wanted to be able to give Soa, as a young adult, the opportunity to share like any of her experiences among other young adults as well, from what Jake and Rich were sharing, and what she has seen around some of this overappeasement or overpleasing and how that's impacted them.
Thanks, Lani. This one, well, especially being in the spaces with a lot of young adults and having these conversations with the youth, it's hard to talk about it. Well, I think it's easy when it comes to mental health because they're more open to this topic. But when it comes to talking about how to talk about it with our parents, like being able to share what our desires are or what we want to do, it's hard to do that within our culture because respect is such a huge thing. And we also want to try and avoid any conflict or make it harder, or avoid anything that makes it harder for our parents because they're already working so hard for us right now. And so that's what I've been hearing and seeing within the youth and among our young adults is that they understand this over appeasement, this pleasing. We just don't know how to stop or how to find different ways to talk with the elderly or to our parents about what other options we have.
Yes.
So yeah,
yes, beautiful. That's the reality. So that's so powerful. So my next question, thank you so much, Soa, is to Rich and Jake. What challenges and changes are you seeing in our community due to the pandemic related to overappeasement and overcompensation among our Pacific Islander communities and in our culture? And Jake, when we come to you, we would love to hear any of the numbers that you're familiar with among our Pacific Islander people when COVID hit, because I can personally say I've seen our people grapple with the COVID, and our numbers are, I'm going to let you as the expert share that, what that numbers did to our people with the COVID. But like, what did we do with that culturally? And what how did overappeasement, when it intersected with that, how did that end up playing out? So anyways, just wanted to ask that questions. What are some of the challenges and changes you've seen, and what's the reality of what our people have been facing during COVID with this?
I think one of the interesting observations that were made was initially when vaccines became available and were approved for emergency use. Initially, it was in stages, right? It was elderly and it went by age. And so you saw the stages for 65 and up, and then eventually you went 55 years old and up and down the line. And initially, as we had these vaccination clinics, when it was for older folks, for our seniors, for our kupuna, the lines were, around the block. Everybody was bringing their mom, their dad, their uncles, their grandparents to come. But as the age of eligibility continued to go down, and now it's 40-year-olds and 30-year-olds, and we didn't see that same level of excitement, I guess you could call it. And I don't know that this ties into overappeasement necessarily, but again, that altruistic nature, or that dynamic of, I can put myself aside, but I got to make sure that mom and dad are taken care of, or I got to make sure that grandpa and grandma are taken care of first. And whether or not I get, COVID is secondary to at least getting them protected. And so that was definitely something we saw there for a variety of different reasons. Basically, we check all the boxes for high-risk categories for the pandemic, in terms of not just pre-existing medical conditions and some of those things, but the fact that a lot of us live in intergenerational households or multi-family households, or that we work in sectors, we're proud working class communities as well, that are essential workers, quote unquote, who didn't have the luxury of staying home or working virtually in many cases. And so there were a lot of different factors that influenced the fact that, within a year of the start, Pacific Islanders had either the highest or the second highest rates for new cases, for hospitalization, and for mortality or for death when compared to other races and ethnicities in the state of Utah. And that's only recently started to plateau. But there's a lot of reasons behind that. I wish I had more insight, or I was smart enough to see how overappeasement perhaps plays into that. But we definitely did observe that there was that a prevalence of folks putting others' needs ahead of them, their own needs or their own preventive care. And I think that may be related.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Lani, can I I'm going to back up a little bit here, just to clarify some things. We're talking about the intervention, where it's like having a plan in place to help, in something that has happened or problems or whatever. In this case here, we're talking about, so the appeasement, it can be in many different, we've kind of talked about how it's part of our culture of this appeasement in our culture, and how it kind of can take us down a wrong path when things happen. So for example, I guess the categories, we've kind of covered some categories here. We talk about cultural appeasement. There's some appeasement that happens at work, where our Polynesianness kind of comes out, and it kind of plays into our work area, even at our school. We sometimes have a tendency not to be at the forefront and answering questions and stuff like that, because we give appeasement to authority, that we let, because they're a teacher. We don't ask questions of a teacher. It could be in politics, where we as Polynesians aren't, maybe we're not good politicians, because we're always giving in, or we're always appeasing others. And then also some of the things that you've dealt with, Lani, is sexual abuse and physical abuse. So I just wanted to kind of put a little frame around, okay, this overappeasement can cover many different areas
Yes.
in our Polynesian spectrum.
Yes.
All right. And because of who we are as Polynesians, it is affecting every one of those things. And and the intervention piece here that you're talking about is mainly within that sexual abuse area. Is that?
It's interesting because initially people may come in describing that that's the reason why they came in. But when you actually begin to go through the assessment and you look at the overall 360 picture of what they went through and how they got here, it's all over the map.
Mhm. Yeah, it's all over the map on these categories that I just said, because one
Yes.
affects the other.
Yes.
And
so, yeah. So initially, they may come in for that, but because we're looking at emotional overall well-being, and there's no such thing as the word mental health in any of the Pacific Islander languages, it's about well-being in all of these areas. It's just that we are now being emotionally and mentally affected to the point where we can't even manage ourselves and our relationships in our daily functioning and in our daily roles. So in this particular talk that we're having right now, where we're talking about the pandemic, we were seeing we weren't just having sessions where people were in closets, because we had multiple families living together and they had to find a space to actually be on a session in private to talk about some of those issues around abuse and neglect. It was also that, what was being revealed in the Kaimaina study was that the second generation, so the first generation being grandma and grandpa, the second generation being the parents, the one that usually are working 2-3 jobs to manage all, the third generation at home, they were missing a lot of times from those sessions, and they were out working all their jobs, and they were the ones making sure, like Jake was saying, that they were being lined up to go get their vaccinations. But guess what? The Kaimaina study revealed and emerged that we had some of the highest emergency long-term stays as Pacific Islanders at one point in the country. So and especially where we had higher pockets, numbers in our population in certain areas, particularly in California and Utah, outside of Hawaii, and especially in West Valley City. And so what I'm saying is that those second generation folks, mom and dad, were over appeasing to the point where they're the ones that are being run to the hospitals because they're working these 2-3 jobs and they're trying to make sure that everybody else is taken care of at their own expense. And then, it's usually the auntie or the cousin or somebody that's making sure that the kids are somewhere to be on a session at the same time while mom and dad are working. And this is their reality. There's multiple families living in there, especially during COVID, because a lot of people became homeless as well. So I hope that somewhat addresses that, but can you see the layers upon layers upon layers of what our people were going through during COVID? People in closets, one guy called us from the park because he didn't even want to go home anymore because he was too ashamed to go over and ask for food when he knew everybody else needed food during COVID. He didn't know who else to call. This is what our people were going through during COVID. So that's why we want to ask, if we are addressing these things, how are we talking about it? If we're not addressing it, what are some of the consequences? Because we're seeing the consequences. So is talking about the young people. They don't even know how to talk about it with their families. They'll talk about it in a session, or they'll talk about it outside, maybe at school or at an activity, maybe at a church activity outside. But when it comes to our own families and how the COVID hit us, and, we don't want to hurt anybody else. We don't want to, try to be in front of anybody else or be disrespectful, and I agree. We believe in the whakaapapa. Our argument is, are we breaking the respect by talking about it? Because this is our reality. This is what our people are going through. And our argument is no, it doesn't break the respect. If we do it in a way that's respectful and we talk about, like what we're doing here tonight, we're having a real conversation about what's really happening among our people.
Lani, I'll piggyback on that. So,
Yeah.
as throughout my years of education and teaching and stuff like that, I've come to the point where I've started just to focus on the kids versus the parents. It's time consuming, and a lot of energy is expended. And yet, it's the same old grind for the parents and so forth, and what's sad is that you have another generation who are being born here. They're doing the exact same thing as well. And not, so I had gotten to a point when I was teaching high school that I was just like, man, I'm just going to focus on these kids and then have them, make those decisions in advance. All right. Yes, you can give the, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way, but this is how I feel, instead of just being quiet and not saying anything. So I've really preached that a lot to them. And I emphasize to the students the importance of language also. And that's why I had taught the Tongan language, because I felt that if these kids can connect with their language. And let me just read something here for you real quick. And and this was from a, as we had gotten these prompts on these questions, it says, one is encouraged in the knowledge that the Tongan language, now, I mean, this could be any language, right? One is encouraged in the knowledge that the Tongan language will be appreciated and understood through this book, which is a book written by Shumway. And it says here, the Tongan language is the doorway to the Tongan culture. For to speak, read, and write Tongan is how one absorbs what is Tongan. I totally believe that. And this was from Princess Pilolevu, part of the royal family. I totally believe that. But with that also comes these things that we're talking about, And yes, some of these kids understand the Tongan language, but then even the language itself. I mean, we can't even give appreciation to kids because it's not part of the culture of who we are. You cannot say, "Tau, man, that run that you had, oh my gosh, that was amazing," because I turned to Tau's dad and say, "Hey, uncle, man, that was great." His response is going to be, he's so. It's that humble route. He's taking the low road on that whole thing. All right, because that's just who we are as a culture. Okay, and versus maybe listening to some of my other friends who are of different cultures, and specifically Palangi, man, your son really did good. Yeah, I thought he did great as well. Can you imagine the kid sitting there listening to his dad praise him that way to a neighbor or to a friend? It doesn't happen in our Pacific Island culture. Okay, we do not praise, because it is given that we already love each other, that we already have the each other's back, and we do. But our kids now are growing in two different cultures or three different cultures, where they see praise from their friends, their family members for their friend, and yet in my home, I'm not even praised for doing good work, for going to school and doing right, And yet, so now I'm confused as to what goes on, because I'll tell you, in Tongan, I cannot sit here and praise Tau, it just doesn't, it's not in the vocabulary of praising, yet I can think of 100 ways that someone can praise their child. Good on you, buddy. Good job. High five, all this stuff. Yeah, it doesn't happen. So now it kind of, and that's where I have gotten to a point where, yes, I was teaching Tongan language to provide identity for these kids, but then at the same time, does that identity also hinder them from maybe progressing in the society in which we are? All right. So it's a double-edged sword almost,
Yeah.
and then you think of the different categories that I had mentioned on how overappeasement here, whether it's through abuse, I'm doing in the abuse category, physical or sexual or cultural or work or whatever. I mean, it just kind of, now it just goes out into the rest of our life. And then as we're trying to find an intervention on, and what do we do? That was the only thing that I felt was, I'm just going to turn to the kids and just, what? I'll praise these kids for all for whatever they are doing great and so forth. If I do run into parents, I'll try to provide that to them as well. Like, hey, this is what your kid has done. You should actually say good job, or something like that, because your kid is expecting that. He understands the Polynesian mindset, but then at the same time, I understand that I live in this culture where my friends are getting praised for different things, but yet I'm not supposed to be that. I'm not supposed to do that. I don't know. Just some things that I've seen in my time as an educator.
No, that's huge. It's huge because so many of the youth are craving that praise. They're craving it. And so you're hitting on something that's so huge that gets swept under the carpet. And, Jake, I've heard you speak fluent Samoan. It's music to my ears. It's so melodic and precious. What do you want to say in regards to language too, for the youth and for the young people and for our people? Because, Rich did bring up a great point about language, and you speak it fluently too. So what is your thought and feeling about that?
I think I'm very, very privileged to share the same language with my dad, and that's the language that was spoken to me while I was in my mother's womb. I mean, even though my primary language of communication is English, and I learned Spanish and Portuguese on an LDS mission, and I speak that Portuguese with my in-laws, and Samoan is still and always will be the language that my heart speaks. And I know that I'm privileged with that because it provides another channel of communication with my dad, with my grandparents, with my uncles and aunties that my cousins who don't speak Samoan do not have. And I know I'm privileged for that. And because of that, I feel like I have an obligation to teach as much as I can. It's why we started the Samoan Language Initiative here in 2011, and we continue to teach community classes every semester, youth class and adult family class, at 2 different levels. It's why we actually adopted the curriculum out of BYU and University of Hawaii to get Samoan recognized as a collegiate course at the University of Utah, where we now have upper division as well. But it's because just like President Kaufusi mentioned, the poetry and the metaphors and the nuances in our languages a lot of them don't translate directly into English. And so you can't fully express them in English. And so we have to teach the language. We have to teach at least some of the linguistic themes to make these themes relevant to folks in the modern times. And there's a saying that in Samoan, which means it's pretty weird, but the alamea is a type of a starfish, the spiny starfish, and means that the remedy for the starfish sting is the starfish itself. And the saying, and I've never stepped on alamea, but they say if you step on it and you get stung and it's stinging and burned, you flip the alamea over and you rub that jelly side on the wound, and it actually alleviates the pain. And it's a saying that we take to mean that the solutions to our community's problems are already in the community. We just have to find them. Or the solutions to the conflicts in our families are within our families, right? It just takes communication channels to bring them out. And I think that that's to your question. I don't feel like we all need to be fluent. That's not a practical reality living in modern urban Utah or the United States or anywhere in the diaspora. And even though I speak with my kids and they can pray and they sing all the songs, I don't expect them to be as fluent as I am, because I'm not as fluent as my dad was. And the further we get generations apart and distance from the islands, that fluency inevitably reduces. But what we can still teach are those themes that are embedded in our language. Like when we ask somebody, what's your name, right? Kohaiho hingoa or oailo ingoa, we translate that as what is your name. But oai doesn't mean what. Kohai doesn't mean what. It means who. We're really asking, who is your name? Yeah, because that's our ancestral worldview. A name is not just a thing or a label that differentiates people. It's a living, breathing entity. It's the representation of people, of who we are, of who gave us that name, of the places and the stories and experiences that come along with that. And that's just one small example. We can talk about, discussions around the meaning of mana or ainga or kainga and all these themes that, yes, we can translate into English, but if we really look at them, they're themes that are very complex, and they're very quintessentially oceanic or Pacific Islander or Polynesian. And I think that plays a lot into building identity. Building identity and having that security allows you to walk into unfamiliar situations because you're familiar with yourself and you have self-confidence in something that roots you and grounds you and connects you to family and to culture and to community, that allows us to venture out of our comfort zones, just like our ancestors did in the middle of the deep blue sea to destinations unknown. But that's where I see language playing a role, even if our kids never become fluent, as long as they're exposed and they're comfortable learning, and their tongues are learning how to create these, ngas and all these different sounds that we have. I think that does instill a confidence and integrity in their upbringing. So yeah, I think it's really important. And I love the work that President Kaufusi has done in affirming identity, especially in youth, through the language. It is the vehicle and the gateway to the culture.
Beautiful, because that fits with the vision of Kaimaina intervention, which is to not lose the me in the we, nor the power of the we. If we will not throw out the baby with the bath water, but keep our strengths and together with our family and keep those strengths, that it is very connected to what you talked about, Jake, and what you talked about, Rich. Beautiful. Tao?
Yes, thank you. So grateful for this conversation and just kind of the direction that it's taken, where we're talking about language and how language is a window into our culture. And I love, President Kaufusi, how you mentioned that it is a window into both the good things and the not so good things. Like, there is no way to express praise for a child because it's not, but that's part of our culture. And as we study it, then our the objective becomes like, how do we fill in some of those blanks? And when I introduced you, Rich, I didn't get a chance to mention your family. That Ofa is your wife, and you have 5 children. And I think that's, our families are significant. And so I apologize for that. Our families are significant in how we have moved forward in trying to overcome some of the cycles and some of the issues that maybe we grew up with. And I'm really interested to hear from both of you in, how did you, was there a point when you decided, I'm confident enough in who I am that I can talk with my dad. And I had this experience myself when I came off my mission. I could finally talk to my dad in a way that if I didn't agree with him, I still felt like I could at least explain to him where I was coming from. Have you gotten to that place? And Rich, it sounds like this is what you're trying to teach the kids, and probably your own kids too. It's like, look, I want this to be a little bit different than it was with my dad. Like, I want you to talk to me, and I'm not going to just judge you, but it's an open conversation. But how do you make that, kind of overcome the past generations and move forward?
Yeah, and I think the intervention part here comes into this, and this is how I dealt with it. Whether my mom or dad did something, especially in front of my kids, they would either whether it's a sasa or whether it's a word of rebuke that in my mind is not praiseworthy. Do you see what I mean? I would actually teach my parents right then and there. The great thing is that they were humble enough to take this in from their son, and so obviously that's hard to do with parents, Polynesian parents. A kid cannot just say, "Dad, you don't know what you're talking about," because we don't talk that way to them.
Yeah.
But for me, I did bring those things up, and I did also explain to, this isn't done in front of my son or my children. I didn't want them to look and see that, here I am reprimanding my parents, but there's somewhere along the way where I said, yeah, mom and dad, we talked about it, that's the word, we talked about it. But in reality, I'm trying to teach my parents, you can't say that, Dad, you can't say that, Mom, and even my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, one's a Palangi man, and the wife is Tongan. My mother-in-law is very traditional. But it was one of those things that I just flat out tell her, Mele, you can't do that. Okay. And she looks at me like, what are you, but it's all done with love. And I said, Mele, this is why I'm asking you not to do that. This is why he's thinking that it's okay for him to behave that way or not to say what he wants to say. So it comes back to this love thing of, as long as we can explain it to our parents, I've seen some who can't even say to their parents, Mom, Dad, you can't say that in front of my kid, because, that look, or like, what are you talking about? This is the way. This is the Tongan way. This is a Samoan way. I can, chastise your kid anytime I want, but so that was my way of doing that. And I've seen great success. I've seen also the interaction between my children and my parents, and also my in-laws. When my father had passed away, my kids just dove right in and took care of the funeral things. And the thing is, my children are not the oldest grandkids. And yet many had come to me and says, man, we can tell that your children knew your father. It wasn't just, come in and say, hey, Grandpa, how you doing? Okay, bye. It wasn't. There was an interaction there of love and gratitude for this great man. Yeah, his mindset was different. Everything he did was different. But then at the same time, he also knew how to teach my kids, because, for me, I'm taking different cultures here and applying it to raising children. I'm sorry to take so much time there.
Thank you. Jake, you have thoughts?
I love that. And I don't know that I'm at that stage where I correct my dad in front of other people. but I am definitely comfortable approaching him in private and having those conversations. And I think that that's one way that saves face for him in front of other Samoan people or other people of his generation who would definitely raise an eyebrow, for him to be corrected by his kids. And then it also, allows privacy to actually open up. Yeah. And there's a saying that we were all raised with, and every Samoan knows this saying, that is a little interesting because it's beautiful. but I don't often see it. I can't say that fairly, but I think the stereotype is that it's actually not practiced, even though it's well accepted and everyone knows the proverb. O whānau manu whawhangai whungala au, whānau tangata whawhangai upu, right? The birds or the animals, their young ones, their offspring are nurtured or are fed with plants or flowers. But whānau tangata whawhangai upu, which means, but the children of human children are nurtured with words. And it speaks to the fact that ours is a culture that's been passed on. It's an oral culture that's been passed on without writing for thousands of years. And how does that happen? It happens through narrative. It happens through sharing. It happens through stories, through genealogies, and through all of these things. And that's always a reminder in the back of my head that even if sometimes stereotypically what we might consider a lack of communication, or maybe an overemphasis on physical communication or discipline, that really the root of the way that culture is passed on is through language and through words. And so taking those opportunities to have conversations and not let them pass by, that's a great lesson, President Kaufusi, to even if it has to be in that moment, yeah, sometimes maybe we do have to speak up and let it be in that moment. I think on a personal note, if I could just share one anecdote, I was the first ethnic Samoan student to be admitted to the University of Utah School of Medicine. And that year, 2008, and Vi Jessup was admitted right after me. I was not the first Samoan student to graduate as a doctor from the University of Utah School of Medicine. I was the first. My dad went to 8th grade and stopped, so I'm his oldest son. I was the first to complete high school. I was the first in our family to go to college and get an undergraduate degree. And then I was the first to be admitted to medical school. And this, if I'm honest with myself now, the pressure was really tough. And when I look back, that pressure to succeed and to achieve, it wasn't just to make me happy. It wasn't a career that I chose. In fact, I studied anthropology, and my goal was to be a teacher, a professor. I didn't want to be a doctor, but there was this first generation American immigrant pressure my whole life that I was going to be a doctor, and that if I became a doctor, that would inspire my next brother to be a dentist, and the next brother to be a lawyer, and the next brother to be an engineer. And I didn't talk about it. I didn't even acknowledge that pressure. I don't think I had the vocabulary around that until I was much older, and until I made the decision to actually follow my heart and follow what I felt was right in my life. And so I didn't finish medical school. I actually went into hospital administration and public health, and I got degrees in those areas, and completely happy and satisfied with where that ended up. But I only bring this up because that conversation of telling my dad was the hardest conversation I've ever had. And it was, now that I'm not in this moment, but over the years, I've realized that it was because there were so many conversations leading up to that I didn't have, that I never expressed that I was unhappy. I never expressed that, even though I was doing well in medical school, that it wasn't really what I was interested in. I didn't explain why it took me 3 years to finish 2 years of medical school, because I kept taking sabbaticals. And I was going to Germany, and I was studying anthropology, and I was going to Samoa, and I was doing research that had nothing to do with medical science at all. And I know now that and I'm hoping I'm practicing this well with my kids, that I'm normalizing these small, everyday, I'm socializing these conversations and opening lines of communication, so that hopefully, I can at least pick up on some of these cues and allow them the freedom to express things along the way, so that it doesn't end up being the most, traumatic conversation I've had to have with my parents. And I'm really blessed at how they reacted to that. And I'm not blaming them for closing lines of communication either. But I think that just as a family, myself as an individual, and just the way that things were, there were expectations, spoken and unspoken. And I went along with them for as long as I felt that I could. But yeah, I guess the moral to that story is we need to feed our children with words, and we need to allow them those opportunities to open up to us and not brush off things, as trivial conversations, or else they could bottle up, or we'll end up missing opportunities.
Jake, thank you for sharing that, because it goes with everything that we're talking about here about appeasement. I think for your father, because you love him more than anything, as we all do, love our parents, but
Right.
somehow what their desire and of us is not the same thing, and it took you a little while here before you could actually approach him on doing that, and I'm glad that conversation happened, and there was one thing that I had told my parents. I said, you brought us here for a reason. You brought us here to America for a reason, and that reason kind of maybe lost a little bit of its bite, because you got here to the land of milk and honey, and now they're working jobs that there's no time for parenting. There's no time to learn a new culture. All they still remember is hard work and put your head down and keep grinding away and don't say anything and so forth, and yet these things started growing inside you. Oh man, I like this, or I like this, but yet they already had a plan in place, for you on what you wanted to be, and for my dad, he wanted me to be an engineer, so I started doing some things as an engineer to work on planes, and so I went so far into the second year of college, I got an AMP license, and from there, airframe power plant, and from there I was getting ready to jump into these other things of technology with planes, and stuff like that. And then of course I got back from a church mission. I thought, I don't want to be stuck in a garage, I don't want to be stuck in a hangar. I said, I don't know. But it was hard for me to tell my dad, kind of just what Jake was saying, hard for me to tell my dad and my parents, that I want to major in English.
Yeah.
Because words became something to me, something important, and of course, and then from there just got going into teaching and everything else. But it is what it is, and I was able to bring that across to him in the most loving way possible. And obviously the fear of hurting my mom and my dad, because I'm going contrary to what they're saying. But I think more than anything, we're talking about intervention, I think is instilling that love in our children to express that to their parents in the most loving way. And I think for us also to teach parents, like, accept that, that is your child. And hence why Lani, and also Tau, that I teach a leadership idea called Aloha, and why Aloha is so important, and it should be part of our, and we've gotten to the point, it's not just about leadership, and it's our way of life, and as I look forward to going on a mission, I'm going right into the hotbed of appeasement. These kids are, and we see that so often in missionaries.
Yes.
I'm only out here because my dad, I gotta go. And I'm doing it because it's something that's expected of me, and so those are going to be tough conversations to have with a missionary, and also with parents.
Yes.
But I want them to be there for the right reasons, and not there's no hiding from anything.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jake, for sharing.
That's beautiful. Both of your stories are incredible. In the interest of time, I was just going to ask Tao, can we just ask Rich and Jake to pick one concept or one word that they see as a strength among our people to actually have those conversations, so that we're not over appeasing, we're not over pleasing, we're actually speaking the truth, and we're being honest with ourselves and with our families who we love. What do you see, if you were to choose a strength or a concept within our culture that we could really tap into and use? And I know you've mentioned several, but if you were going to pick one before we close, in the interest of time, what would that be to help us really make these conversations and create these conversations and create space for these conversations to happen?
I'm going to jump in because I want President Kaufusi to have the last word. But I would say that a saying, a proverb that I learned from my grandmother and that echoes frequently is "Ole mea ta'ua ole tino," which means the most important thing. Tino means body, but it really it's symbolic of saying the most important thing is your presence, is being there, is putting in work, is serving. And it relates to this is a saying that you hear sometimes jokingly, but it's a saying that applies to big social events, right? Where you have the fine mats on the top of the big presentations like the hala or the si, that sometimes someone shows up with just one pack of bananas. You know, sometimes people show up with a whole truckload full of corned beef cans and everything else. But what that means, ole mea ta'ua ole tino, is the most important thing is that that person showed up. And it didn't matter what they were wearing. It didn't matter how much money was in their sila. It didn't matter how many cans of corned beef they brought. If they're sincere, you could show up with nothing, but you being there is what's most important. And I think that that is something that's always stood out in my mind as what we value. And we talked about this earlier, that we value selflessness and self-sacrifice and service in benefit of others, but that the tino or the presence or the body is usually not ourselves. And when we feel overburdened or overpressured or stretched too thin, we can borrow other people's bodies as well, and that we should be collaborative and ask others for help and ask others to help us fulfill these obligations so that they don't become overwhelming. That's a lesson that I learned from my grandmother, and a saying that really I try to implement in my own life.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you, Jake. That's true wisdom there. Let me maybe put it in this little story. When Alf and I, we were going to go get married. We were planning to get married, and the wedding had taken on this big, huge gathering. My parents, and because of our faith, they come from generations of being members of the LDS faith, and my mother, soon to be mother-in-law, and my father-in-law, they had just joined the faith. You know, they're the first in their families to join this faith. And so my mother, and of course the father-in-law is soon to be father-in-law is a Palangi gentleman who can care less about Tongan things, but yet he speaks Tongan. You know, he understands it, and because of his maybe who he is he's of a different culture, that he gets away with maybe saying things that you know, because he's Palangi, he can say that, you know, but yet he's saying it in Tongan. You know, so it's okay. But anyhow, and so I saw this big luau happening, and you know, there's a lot of giving and taking in these cultural gatherings, and here were these two big, huge families doing this preparation, and the lone person that was doing this on my soon-to-be wife's side was my soon-to-be mother-in-law. And I could see the frustration of, I've got this mat, I'm sending some things from New Zealand to be brought over, you know, and she's alone. Okay, so I said to my wife, I said, Ofa, let's just go get married. She didn't know my reasoning for it or anything like that. I said, you and I have access to the temple, which is where we went to, and let's just go get married. And that, after all, isn't that the important thing? Who cares about the luau? So she agrees to it. So we tell our parents the day before. I told we can't tell them, like, give them ample time to prepare. So we tell our parents the night before we were going the next day. And so, of course, they all show up anyway. My parents on both sides. We go down to Manti, Utah. There's a temple, LDS temple there. That's where we go and have the ceremony, okay, in the temple. Anyhow, long story short, there was still a celebration after, but you know what? After the fact, I didn't care what happened. It wasn't until a few years later that I was telling this story to someone, and I said, I could not see my mother-in-law be at a celebration and having to be embarrassed because she didn't have things for my family. Okay, the things that are necessary in our culture to make a celebration. All right. Of course, they were all taken aback by the whole fact that, so we call it eloped. We eloped to the temple, but to us, that was the most important thing. Nothing else mattered. And of course, telling my parents the night before, mom, dad, forget the celebration. We just want to go get married. Not giving any reason why, but other than, a few years later, they find out the reason of why I felt that way. I didn't want this woman, this dear woman, to go through that embarrassment, of not having what was deemed appropriate for this wedding. I think more than anything, love has been after being in education for a while and seeing this, and of course this crosses into my faith. A good man once said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." I have taken that to mean anything. It means in politics, we talk about the ailments of society. If I apply love to it, how can it fix it? Okay. Like, how can I apply this in my business dealings? How can I apply it in my everyday living? How can I apply it? And so I've taken that whole thing and I just started to apply it into my students, my honor students. Of course, I can't say that, in that setting, but what I do talk about is emotional intelligence. A lot of students and people say, "I don't have that in me." I said, you're kidding yourself. We have the neurochemicals in us because it is part of our survival kit. To have those emotions in us. And so it is there, a guy from Harvard, Ronald Goldman, he made a killing off of calling it emotional intelligence, and now research comes out that if you're an emotionally intelligent person, that is EQ is what they call it. That is way, way better than IQ. Okay. Yes, everyone's smart, but can you talk to someone? Can you empathize with someone? Can you love someone? And so love has been at the forefront of a lot of things that I've been able to do. And I don't really care the setting that it's in. I just know that I believe in that if I love someone enough, the way that I love myself, that I would be kind, I would be wiser, and that even includes our parents, who we just admire and love so much. And yet we're scared because we might hurt their feelings and so forth. But I think I can say that from my own end, that I've been able to speak to my parents. I couldn't have done it as a kid, but as life got a little older for me, I said, "Dad, this is why," and then of course he looks beyond and realizes that our culture is always evolving and needs to evolve. So anyhow, aloha, ofa, talofa, however way you alofa, however you want to say that, I just believe it. And that's another thing, because I'm teaching this to students about emotional intelligence, about the umbrella of love. Underneath that, you have compassion, servitude, and all that stuff. And when I ask them, I actually have a slide. I put up a slide that just says, which one is your language? After they've learned about the meaning of aloha and love. And then they realize that I have it in my culture already, and that's, I don't know, maybe my way of making it inclusive, to realize that love is but I always think, I asked some of the students, I said, how's love going to fix this? How is it going to fix this acquisition? How is this going to fix this politician or whatever? Anyhow,
it works.
It does.
Yeah. Love and presence. Presence and love. Wow. That's a wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What an amazing conversation. Let me just kind of wrap things up real quick. I'll turn the time over to you, Lani, in a second for our final quote. But I just want to express my gratitude to our guests, Jake Fitisemanu and President Rich Kaufusi, for your insight and for your honesty. And I too have gone through this process of trying to speak to my parents about what I want to do. My dad wanted me to be a politician and a lawyer, and that's the last thing I wanted to do, you know. But it was not an easy thing to do, and I'm grateful for your examples. Hopefully, people that are listening see that it can be done, you know. And one of the themes that I'll just kind of point out that has emerged in our conversation this evening is the importance of language and communication. And that it's, you know, part of it is what we say, part of it is how we say it. But the most important thing is that we say something, you know, and don't be afraid. You are both great examples of men who approached something very scary and had the courage and understood the value and the importance of speaking up, but finding the right way to do it. And doing it with that emotional intelligence that you speak of, President Kaufusi. Thank you so much. I can't express how grateful I am just to be a part of the conversation this evening. So as the steersman of this canoe tonight, I have to give all praise to the ones that paddled. You guys, we couldn't have made it to our destination without you guys. So thank you. And to our captain, I'll give the time to her for a final word and a quote. As we reach our destination, it's appropriate to hear something from our leader. And so I'll turn the time over to you, Dr. Taholo, and we'll sign off.
Okay. Just before I close, I want to say I have a deep love and respect for each of you. Jake and Rich, there's such a camaraderie and love for each of you as our brothers. Thank you for your love and your example. And to hear from SOA with the young adults and what they've been going through was so powerful. And to hear from Tao and his experiences too, what he went through with his father. I honor each of you. So grateful for each of you and your families. For the opening and closing, typically what we say for our Kaimaina Intervention podcast statement is always ask yourself the hard questions. Do your homework. Apply it with an open mind and heart. And don't forget to move out of your own way as you witness yourself grow. We love and appreciate all of you. Malo apito. Pakitai. Ofatu.
Ofatu. Best of luck to you, President Kaufusi. Godspeed. We love you. Thank you, Jake.
Tao. Love you, Jake. Appreciate you. It's always good to hear you again. And so thank you so much, Lani, for having us. And of course, SOA, keep up the good work you're doing in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.